Hey everyone, Nathan here, president of Saybrook University. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. I was reminiscing on the early days of graduate school not long ago with a good friend of mine. She's been my best friend since we started, and remembering how full of trepidation I was in terms of whether or not I could do it, what it all entailed, would I measure up, all the things that come with any new experience, really, augmented by the fact that you're working and studying alongside all these graduate students and faculty who knew stuff and know what they did. Now, I was younger at the time, but also my wife and I had just welcomed in our first child, Simone, into the world. Life felt wicked fierce. The financial strain, this childcare, which we finally figured out. I was proud stay-at-home dad for several years while going to school, but it took some doing to get that all ironed out. And a host of other considerations to work through, as the case is for just about everyone. But despite all of the stuff going on, it was an adventure. The outcome of which I had no idea. I had no idea if going through my doctoral program would pay off, if there was a definitive job at the end, but I knew this was something I had to do. I was very passionate about it. I didn't know if I was going to become a faculty member, if I was going to be smart enough to get through the comprehensive exams, to do the dissertation. A good piece of advice came from my mentor, get kind of verklempt when I talk about him at times, Dr. Leo Kriskowski. He's now passed away. He's a former college president, renowned historian, and really had this piece of advice. He's like, it has nothing to do with intelligence. And I laughed, and I'm like, what are you saying, Leo? And he's like, no, hear me out. It has a lot to do with tenacity, and it's about 90% of it is tenacity. Going through graduate school, getting through any degree, finding that first or second job, leveling, skilling up, doing something different in your life, it really entails tenacity. And those things worth doing, worth having, it's all about tenacity. And Leo's words ring so loudly and true to this day. Because I think about all of our students here at Saybrook University and how amazing they are. The families they're rearing, they're going to work, a lot of them every day. They're pushing this out, pulling this thing in, getting things done, getting a paper done, writing a dissertation or a thesis. They're getting it done. And they're bright, they're smart, but it's also a lot about tenacity. Sticking with it, making it happen. Enter Dr. Joanie Terrizzi, a recent graduate of Saybrook University's Mind-Body Medicine program. Joanie and I met as I was fairly new to Saybrook as a president, and she struck me as just this incredibly positive, shining light, wicked smart, and a devotee to both the life of the mind and dedicating herself to the work of integrative health and healing. And when I reached out to Joanie about interviewing on Saybrook Insights, my hope was to better understand her own experience, both coming into the graduate school arena and what her own secrets to success were in managing graduate school, along with all the other things that life can throw in the way. And you know what? It all came down to passion and tenacity. She did it. She graduated. She's coming here to Pasadena here in just a few weeks to celebrate her own passage. And she's one more shining example of a Saybrook student challenging convention and doing the work. So let's get to it with Saybrook alumna, Dr. Joanie Terrizzi. Dr. Joanie Terrizzi, what an honor to have you here today on Saybrook Insights. Before we get started, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to Saybrook University, a little bit about your personal history. Full disclosure for the audience, Joanie and I seem to almost go way back. I mean, almost to when I first started here. And she's always been the first one to give me a hard time when I come into the residential conferences in a good way. So, Joanie, take it away. Tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much. And I'm honored to be here as well. So I guess I began what I would call my career as an elementary school librarian. I got my master's in library science right out of college, and I had already gotten my training as a teacher, undergrad at my university. So I was in that career for quite some time. And as a school librarian, I fell in love with teaching mindfulness to the kids. And I kept thinking, oh, maybe one day I'll go for a PhD. And every time I would look at the PhDs in library science, I would just look at them and say, I don't want to attend these courses. And then somehow Saybrook flitted across my attention at exactly the right time. And I looked at the courses that were offered, and I wanted to take every single course all at the same time. And I was like, well, I think that's some information there that this might be the right direction.
Yeah.
And a couple years prior to that, I had gone to my first meditation retreat and I fell in love with it so much immediately, and came back into the classroom the next week and started teaching mindfulness to the kids just intuitively, spontaneously, just however it came to me to teach it. I took a year-long training with the organization Mindful Schools. And as I taught mindfulness more and more, it felt more meaningful to me to be doing that than to be teaching library skills. And then when I applied to Saybrook, and I may have saved your voice message somewhere in the archives of my phone welcoming me to Saybrook, and uh, started that program. And it took me a little bit to realize that I actually could do some research work that was based on the mindfulness work that I had been doing. So it kind of took me a circuitous way. One doesn't usually go from elementary education and library into mind body medicine, but it was the right thing for me.
That's so cool. Well, so I want to sit with this for a minute. These interviews always bring up things like I had no idea about that background. So this is super cool. So you mentioned you went to this mindfulness retreat. Let's unpack that. And then I want to get into like how you got teaching mindfulness to your school children, because I think that's incredibly cool and salient, especially today in our society. So this mindfulness retreat, for the uninitiated who have no idea, first of all, what mindfulness is, and second of all, what is a mindfulness or meditation retreat? What does that all entail? So maybe fill us all in.
Yeah, you basically just spend a week breathing.
And you pay for the privilege? Is that it? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And they feed you so you can keep breathing,
Oh, okay, good, good.
which is all true. And I had been, because I was an elementary school educator, I'd been traveling on school breaks, and I decided I really liked traveling places other people didn't want to go. So I've been to Paris, but I was like, no, I'd rather be in Estonia. And then I got a little tired of traveling alone. And I saw this meditation retreat, and I called up my best friend who had done it a couple times. And I said to him, but I've never meditated. Should I do this? He said, absolutely. I said, well, how will I know if it's for me? He said, well, you'll have plenty of time to figure it out. And for me, it was a continuation of traveling places people don't usually travel, except that journey was inward rather than outward. And uh, I definitely would say I went farther on that trip than on any other I had. So there were guided sessions of sitting meditation and guided sessions of walking meditation, and a lot of support for people who had never meditated before, and some, I'd say, wisdom talks peppered throughout. What was particular about this one, I am Jewish, and this was a Jewish meditation retreat, and there was a dance component as well. So it would go between the settledness of sitting and the ecstaticness of dance, and the interplay between those two, sort of peeling back layers and layers. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I would say the big takeaway I have from that one, which was more than a decade ago now, um, was that my mind started to slow down. And I started to hear what I was saying to myself and how I was talking to myself most of the time, and the highly critical nature of that. And I experienced a lot of depression in my younger years. And I don't recall exactly how depressed I was at that time, but I felt like someone had swung the doorway open to the possibility of things being different. It didn't change it all at once, But I knew that if I were to enter that room and continue, or down that hallway, or whatever was on the other side of the door, that if I would continue there, that there would be relief. And I would say that in that intervening time, pandemics and such aside, like bigger calamities aside, I've grieved and I've been sad, but I have not in normative day-to-day life entered the same sort of depression that I had felt prior.
That is incredible testament to meditation and mindfulness. And we've talked about this before in my own personal life, like, and Saybrook was the reason for this. I had never done meditation or mindfulness work at all until I came to Saybrook. It was one of your faculty members, Lou Ann Fortune and Kerwin Rockefeller, who were instrumental in getting me the skeptical Midwesterner that I was when I first came in, and said, just try it. It's going to be great. And I'm like, I don't know. And then you're absolutely right. It was transformational in that respect of, I didn't realize all the self-talk and the anxiety that was kind of suppressed within, and how that kind of changed things. When you say that it was transformational and you saw this door swing open to other possibilities, and you've been able to, I don't know, is self-regulate a little bit? Is that too far? Is that a fair word or a fair phrase to use? I mean, what all kind of came about for you in that transformational process?
A commitment to an internal kindness, I would say, would be the first thing. And then more ease in that arising. So I remember I came back from that meditation retreat, and this sort of answers some of your question before, and I found little ways of dropping in. So I, in my own mind, invented a little practice, and then later found that to be the first practice that was in a curriculum that I learned from others, of just ringing, a little meditation bell and having the kids raise one hand when the sound disappeared. So that's 30 to 40 seconds as a whole class comes in. And when I'm working with hundreds and hundreds of kids, or when I was working, that was too much for my nervous system. And I eventually learned that by my increased sensitivity. But having that moment of settling when highly dysregulated kids come into a room was really profound. And after that first retreat, I would meditate. I started with a 5 minute a morning practice, and I was so proud of myself. And I often talk about this one moment when I had a class, they came in, they sat down, they were all facing me, and one kid turns completely around to face the kid behind him. And I opened my mouth, ready to have my, stern teacher voice. I don't remember the kid's name, but you turn around. And I mean, not quite that stern, but like internally, that was the orientation of like, frustration. And I opened my mouth, and what came out was a very sweet, like, hey, kiddo, I love your hair, but I'd really rather see your face right now. So some of that kind of like fun humor and a lightness. And the kids all laughed, and the kid turned around shyly and joined us. And I noticed that there was something smoother inside me that allowed a more adaptive response to what was going on.
That's great. What, working with kids in mindfulness, what was the impetus behind providing this to your kids at the school? I mean, that doesn't come intuitively to a lot of folks. So curious.
I felt like they really needed it. And I looked back and I thought of myself as a quiet, well-behaved, high-performing student who, to any outward teacher observations, would not have shown how much I needed it. And I felt like I needed it so much. I want to give it to these kids before certain of life's challenges come along. And I remember one person saying to me, you should only give it to the kids who really need it. And I would always advocate for the fact that you cannot see that. I still remember, it must have been 5 years ago. I was talking to a second grade teacher, and I said, well, you know, here's a helpful strategy, to not trigger any kids in your class who are traumatized. And she said, oh, none of my kids are traumatized. And I think even in the last 5 years, the conversation has shifted so much more to realize just how much trauma is out there, and how much, even in a normative, caring day-to-day life, a lot of people have experienced trauma. And it just feels like this capacity to meet more of one's own life. And I really wanted to give that to my kids. It went, I was, as I said, I was always a student. I moved a lot as a kid. It felt easier to me to do well in school than it was to do well socially. So I would always gravitate towards that. And I got to a point in teaching where I cared less if the students succeeded and more that they were okay.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Did you assess it in any way with the kids?
It wasn't particularly assessing. I think we do a lot of assessing, but I started to ask the kids, how did you use your mindfulness in the last week? The only hints I gave them in the curriculum were like, if you need to calm down or to help you fall asleep. But more, I started asking that question so that they were actually teaching each other how to use the practices. And just to having that was almost worth more than whatever lesson I was giving them, was hearing other children suggesting things that happened in their lives and how they use the mindfulness to navigate it.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. That's a such a fabulous detour in our conversation, a good one that I really think is powerful. So, for the educators out there, it can be done. Joanie Terrizzi can be found online for your first consultation session about how to implement this in your schools through the Mindful Schools program. Not through, but in concert with, right?
That was the curriculum that I used at the time. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Well, let's shift gears for a minute. I want to talk about your experience as a student at Saybrook, but particularly kind of at the global graduate level, right? So, before the interview, you and I were talking. At the introduction of your episode, I was discussing kind of you know, people get really understandably concerned, scared, a little terrified of graduate school, what it all entails. And also there's this bubbling excitement about what's going to happen, what am I going to learn, like how am I going to change. And I thought with our interview maybe we could talk through some of those ideas, right? Like what you really went through, especially second career professional. It's maybe a little scary coming out of a traditional you already had a traditional path lined up, and then here you are going into something totally different. So maybe like what went through you when you first started graduate work here at Saybrook, and like what excited you most? What got you really freaked out, worried, and how did you manage it all? Probably mindfulness is one of those things. But yeah.
I think the thing that excited me most was going to my first RC and the very pervasive feeling that these are my people, that these are my people who want to dive deep into similar topics as me and a similar sort of mindset towards the mind body integrative field, and a lot of joy in that. As I already said, I was so excited about the classes themselves, the topics that I would be learning. And the thing I was a bit most overwhelmed by the idea of was spending more time on my computer and spending more time, sort of plugged in and in study mode when I had really hit a point of relative smoothness in my career where I had a bit more life work balance. And I was intimidated by the prospect of being really sort of kind of like under the studiousness at all times.
Yeah, yeah.
And the first 2 years of my degree program, I was working full time as an educator. The second two, I was not. So I released myself from that added pressure. That was a lot to juggle at the time.
Yeah, if you can afford it, you can figure out a way to make it work. It makes it a little bit more manageable, in terms of to immerse yourself, right, in the content and to be able to do that. What was it like working full time and going to school? And you did it obviously, and I know you made a choice or a change in that path, but maybe describe that experience for you.
Things felt more meaningful working towards something new, especially returning to school after having been out. I was just trying to do the math in my head. It's eight-ish, 9 years after my master's. Um, there was for me a really renewed energy, some real space. I did not have space between my undergraduate and my master's, so having had some more life experience, some more space was really helpful. And I really devoted a lot of time to the reading. And I would try to have that be nourishing. So I would have like a full day of reading, or I'd go read in the park when I could. I'm, I don't know if it's old enough or just old fashioned enough that I had to print out everything because my eyes don't scan screens the same way. And so I made sure I always had content with me. And then it was nice to have the balance of the job to focus on something else. So those ideas that were percolating in the back of my mind had a lot more time to grow without me sort of like watching the pot to see if it would boil.
No, that's really cool. Did you find that there were, I don't know, the challenges that may have emerged during your course of study? How did you mitigate some of those? Like, what was your approach to dealing with those, especially, maybe in the heat of a course or dealing with your dissertation?
Crying a lot. I'm trying to think. So I have a master's in library science. So I have a research degree prior to getting a research degree. And I took the research sequence over again, or I took the research sequence even though I think I could have passed out of it, to have a really fresh sense of um, what I was learning and how to use it. And I would say I really wanted to do really well. And sometimes I did not. I ended up, so what I noticed is a lot of, with myself and with some of my classmates, is really transformative experiences happening in my own life parallel to being in Saybrook, that I couldn't have imagined, that I think came from a sense of opening from being part of the program and part of the community. So I moved at one point and went through some other hard and growthful situations. And through all that, I let go a little bit of having the perfect grades. And it still kind of like bothered me when I didn't do as well as I wanted to, or I struggled with not being able to get as much of the reading done as I would have liked, but just really staying right where I was. It's a mindfulness approach. I'm right here. This is what I can do now. Here's the paper I can write today. Tomorrow I need some time off. That's for me. So really just staying with what's the healthiest way to go about this. And one of my favorite strategies throughout the program was whenever I was the beginning of the semester, I'd pick a friend or two and we were like semester buddies and, figuring out assignments together and bouncing ideas off each other and reminding each other of due dates. And
Yeah, that's really cool. Semester buddies. All right, we've got a new thing that we can implement. Oh, that's really terrific. I can't imagine too. It's how, especially when you're coming back after being out of it for a while, right? Where you were in the educational experience and come into it, and you have all these heightened expectations of yourself, and you get your first B or maybe a whatever grade, and it can be a gut punch. But to your point, I think so many of us, now that we're older and see, in the field working in whatever research, a lot of students will say, well, it's you, yeah, you can say that, but it is true. It's like, you are not your grade. Like, this is what, I love how you put that. This is where I am right now in this moment, right? And you're learning, you're engaging with the material, you are doing well enough, and sometimes well enough is good enough, right? I think that's really a great way to put it.
yeah, and no one has asked me what my grades were in my PhD program. So I haven't had to disclose, that I was both living and a student at the same time. And I also now do some, I guess, sort of freelance dissertation editing and coaching, helping students and many Saybrook students through the program. And I think that I've turned that into something meaningful, being there for others in the same sort of scenario.
That's so cool. And for those who don't know, Joni is a wickedly gifted writer, and very, very exacting. I often feared sending out any communication because I thought it would come back with a worse than Grammarly. Oh my God, no, in a good way. No, that's a really important skill that you've developed, and I know so many students, colleagues, peers have benefited from your your approach to editing. Let's shift just a wee bit, but still staying on your graduate experience. I want to know what you did for your research and how you're applying it today. Like, what did that look like, and the experience of doing dissertation research. What was that like for you?
So my topic was children's experiences using mindfulness in daily life. And I did qualitative research, as I just am in my heart a really qualitative researcher. And I used my teaching notes from when I taught mindfulness to pull up all those statements that I had written down that children had used to get to a hermeneutic phenomenological understanding of how the children used the mindfulness when they weren't with me, or how they applied what they had learned when they were with me. And throughout that process, I had also, it was very interesting, I had taken sort of a passion pivot and got really interested in grief and death. And my chair kept asking me, "Are you sure you don't want to switch topics?" And I said no, because I will never turn in something about grief or death. I will always be finding more, that I just found such a deep well of interest inside me. And I had thought that the children's mindfulness sort of felt like a capstone on that. Some more of that era. I still am available for that work, but have turned more towards the grief work, uh, and was something that I was passionate enough and would turn in. So it's sort of like this combination of like enough energy to do it and enough finished distance to be able to turn it in.
So I guess my follow on to that would be, how are you using that today? Then I want to come back on another point here momentarily.
So I do some mindfulness work these days, interwoven with some of the other things. And the research approach has actually been what has informed a lot more of my experience. I just wrote a grant application that would be a project that would fund a project that would be very similar, with a very different population. And so looking at the world through that qualitative lens, with the ability to show up in a research role in an organization. This one is a death related organization. That's been really meaningful to me.
That's great. Definitely want to hit the death and dying and grief area for a moment, because that's definitely a left turn going to Albuquerque. That, right? Right. I want to come back, but it's a good one. I'm curious if you could explain for our audience, because we do have a lot of folks out there who are like, qualitative, hermeneutic, phenomenological, and understandably would be like, what is that? So what is it, and what are those things, and how was that helpful to you in getting the research kind of to come to life for you?
So qualitative is experiential versus numbers, not counting and statistics um, and cause and effect, or a controlled study where you do a process and figure out what happened from it. But qualitative is what's um, the experiential components for the participants. And phenomenology gets to the essence of the experience, and hermeneutic phenomenology weaves back and forth between the building conceptualization of the essence of the experience and one's own experience. So there's a back and forth uh, looking at both oneself and the material. And for me, I felt like I could not separate myself from the results that I was looking at, from the words that I was reading, as the educator who both heard those and taught the children mindfulness, that my experience teaching them mindfulness was interwoven with my understanding of the essence of the experience for them.
That's like an A+ definition. Like, way to go.
It's almost like I'm a librarian and a teacher or something.
And a PhD. I mean, you got it nailed down, and you're able to explain it. So, I mean, props to you for that. That's really terrific.
And I can even spell it too.
You can. I won't even make you do that right now today. Yeah, no, that's good. So, when you think about then kind of the balance of your Saybrook experience, right? And like everything that you came into it for. What was most transformational for you?
What I see is a mountain in my mind when I close my eyes right there to think. And I love mountains. I've since moved to the mountains. Um, and just knowing that there's something big and I can climb it and I don't have to do that alone. That I was able to, and when I think about the like densely drenched days of like research and writing, I think about it was really hard. It peeled back layers of myself as well. And now it's like I feel like I'm pointing like, look, I climbed that mountain. And it just reminds me how much I can do on a backdrop of really hard things happening in my personal life. And then I finished it all up. I was writing my proposal in the first weeks of COVID. So like finished it up in quarantine and just the ability to, I don't think, this is a personal opinion here, I'll own it. I don't think it's possible to write a dissertation and not be transformed by the process.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Put it. And honestly, it is so depthful that you're absolutely right. There is no way that you can't be transformed by it intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. I think that's a great way to put it. And for you in that writing process, what you've kind of alluded to this here and there and a little bit in your answer, but what really came forth as you were kind of in that penultimate experience, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. As you mentioned, I'm a writer, but I like beautiful words. I like stringing together really evocative sentences. I've been writing poetry since graduating, and I trend that way. I always loved writing fiction. So getting into that academic, scientific writing was really hard for me, which is why I enjoy helping others because I know how hard it is. And using my mindfulness and some of the teachings of my favorite mindfulness and meditation teachers, I would sit down in front of my computer and I have a little timer. I time myself for how long is something actually taking me so that I have a sense of that because this brain has no sense of that. And there were days I would sit down for a whole day and I'd do 7 minutes of actual work. I don't know what I did on my computer the other 8 hours I was sitting there, but I was really watching myself and I was watching that the energy just wasn't there for it. And I was alone in isolation in quarantine. It was a really hard time. And my meditation teachers have taught uh, do something when the energy for it is there, which is really hard in our society because the world isn't, deciding that you're going to be ready to do something at 9 a.m. on Monday is not always aligned with internal energy. And there were a couple lot longer than I wish, maybe a couple months where I would sit there and very little would come out. I'd be getting things done and I'd be turning them in, but very little would come out. And then I sat down one day and wrote my dissertation in about 2 weeks because the energy was there. And when people give that look, I always say, I use a metaphor of like a woman gives birth in like what number of hours, right? I don't know, like 1 to 40. I don't know exactly how all that works, um, but it's not just that. It's the gestation period is what allows for the birth to happen in those hours. And so uh, the work really gestated in my mind for a long time, and then when it was time I wrote it. But sitting there day after day wanting to get this thing done, wanting a little egoically to like finish early and 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 accomplish something in a time when it was really hard to accomplish anything, sitting there in the not quite yet energy was really hard. And then one day it was there and it was time and I did it.
It must have been a hell of a gestational period. I mean, you must have come up with a lot in that time. Seriously, no, I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Well, you could just read all 417 pages of it online.
I've got it right here. I'm going to start right now. It'll take me more than 2 weeks, I'm sure. 417 pages in 2 weeks. Wow. Yeah, that's it.
So some of it was rewriting and some of it was, updating the proposal to the dissertation, but like having nothing to turn in 1 week to 2 weeks later, turning it in was.
Well, and I think that that's important. I mean, kind of, it's weird. I think maybe you and I have a few others that we probably operate similarly. I'm giving you a hard time. My dissertation now I had less oh intellectual pursuits when I was kind of wondering what I was doing. I was up at 3 a.m. watching the Game Show Network, going, I need to be working on my dissertation. I was doing everything but. And then it was this cascade of work that just, it wasn't total procrastination, I assure you, but it was one of those things where, like how you position that is so well put, because it just, I was able to get it all done and it turned out well. I mean, of course, all the edits and stuff that you got to do, but yeah, that's a really, really interesting way to put it. I didn't get it done in 2 weeks.
I don't recommend it. My body hurt from sitting, and oh,
I bet it did. I bet it did. And was Murray around for that? Murray is her dog, everybody. Yeah.
Murray was definitely around for
Yeah,
that.
poor Murray. He probably didn't eat or drink or go to the bathroom for several days. Poor guy.
He made it through as well.
He did. He survived. He's going to be writing me letters though for therapy down the road. Help on that. So in terms of individuals thinking about Saybrook University, what are like 2 or 3 pieces of advice as they consider their experience here that you would give to them?
I would say to put in place some really nourishing habits that you can rely on, or have people who get it. So that might be semester buddies, pick out semester buddies every semester, but also ways to maintain some grounding in your life. A lot of people are parents. I'm not. That's probably why I was able to do that and have a very strange timeline on it. But having other support built into one's life that continue, like one friend where you're like, we're gonna get together every month no matter what, or like someone who brings you soup once a month, or I don't know, whatever it is, just something that connects you with bits of human and human contact and nurturing throughout the process. Go at the pace that allows you to live your life as well, and to find what makes you feel alive to pursue rather than what you should pursue. So there was some should energy around like library PhD for several years for me, that like, oh yeah, that's a thing I should do because it's the next step. But when I found Saybrook, I was like, no, this is what I really want to do.
Yeah, and it sustained you to get through the program and to do your dissertation in 2 weeks. I mean, like all of those things, right? I mean, you had just this burning passion to really sink into it and do it.
And I went to every RC that uh no, I think I missed one, but I went to pretty much every RC that I could, even after I'd fulfilled my requirement. I don't know what the requirements are like now, but that really helped me stay connected, and really enlivened me and was like that boost. I specifically remember the last one that I went to where um, it was the last one before COVID. And it was just like, ah, yes, this is why, which really set the stage for the next semester.
That's right. I think you were starting to beam knowing that you were on the final zone, right? Yeah. That's great. All right, so I have 2 quick take questions. So the top of your head, whatever comes to mind. There is no right or wrong answer. Not technically, So no, I'm teasing. So this is the Joanie Terrizzi take on these 2 items. So this will be fun.
Oh boy.
So as you know, Saybrook is grounded in the humanistic tradition, humanistic philosophy. What does the term humanistic mean to you?
I would say awareness of our interbeing. I've spent a profound amount of time alone, and nothing in this world happens without humans connected. So I've often found myself giving the analogy of like, oh, we have to love ourselves. And yes, we do. Oh, you have it all inside. And yes, we do. And if someone dropped you off in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you're not creating a permaculture farm in 2 weeks. You need materials supplied by other people. You need labor supplied by other people. I mean, for any bit of food to get on my table, and to extrapolate that out into a sense of the studies, the humanistic studies that highlight our interbeing as organisms.
All right, the last question. So right now, lots of challenges in the world, lots of challenges with mental health, whole health. What are 3 things people can do right now, Dr. Terrizzi, to improve their mental health and well-being?
Be in nature more would definitely be one for me. That's part of why I moved to the mountains. There's things in my life I can't control, but I say that the one thing I can control is being someplace beautiful as much as possible. So being, and nature can be a house plant. I've got several of those around here, and it can be a park, or it could be a bigger sense of awe of the world around us, being in a beautiful place. I'd say being in deep connection with others is one of the most meaningful things that really helps me. I've read the book Lost Connections by Johann Hari. Talks a lot about these forms of connection that really improve our mental health. And the third one, perhaps a little less mainstream, is to grieve what needs to be grieved, to grieve the backlog of griefs, to be in touch with our collective grief.
That's beautiful. And I wish we'd had more time to talk through that today. Maybe we could have you back with Dr. Gina Belton to talk about contemplative end-of-life care and grieving.
That would be so fun for me.
So we'll make it a date at some point in the not too distant future to do that. That would be terrific. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here today, Joanie. And Dr. Terrizzi, where can we find you on the web? Are there any books that you've written? Anything you want us to know about you? Where can we find you?
Whew. I have 3 different websites, which does make sense in a weird way. I have breathetolearn.com, which was my main website for the children's mindfulness work. And then I have nurtureandthrive.org, which is the mindfulness, yoga, Reiki, hypnosis, the other things I learned along the way, mostly while I was at Saybrook. And then with the pivot and my more current work, I'm at grieftender.org, which is where I talk about what I offer for all kinds of grieving.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Joanie Terrizzi, the fabulous Saybrook alumna from the Ph.D. Mind Body Medicine program, hosts the websites breathetolearn.com, nurtureandthrive.org, and grieftender.org, along with all the great stuff she's doing. She is on LinkedIn, I believe, so you can find her there. And on Facebook, some really beautiful postings that I've read. You may not know, but I read almost everything that's out there, and you have some very inspirational work that it's very touching, and I think it reaches a lot of folks. So appreciate you, and find her. She's a great asset to any organization that's doing this kind of work. So Joanie, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and you're welcome.
All right, that was very fun. I always love talking to students and alumni, and Joanie is no exception. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Terrizzi as much as I did. Remember her 3 major takeaways from today. Be in nature more. Be in deep connection with others. And grieve. Grieve what needs to be grieved. Powerful words from Dr. Terrizzi. If you want to see the video segments we've created, please visit our Saybrook YouTube page. And if you'd like to support the podcast, which I humbly ask that you do, go to Apple iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. Subscribe to us so that you can get episodes as they come out. If you're on Spotify, leave that 5-star rating. Make sure to follow us. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, including Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Pandora, and others. Remember to check out our show notes for information on today's guests, including links to the websites, books, etc. that she brought up. For more about our Mind Body Medicine program or the university, go to www.saybrook.edu. Click on those areas of study at the top of the page and locate the program to learn more, or simply Google Saybrook University Mind Body Medicine program. That's it for today. Thank you all very much. Take care and be well.